Hi, guys. I want to welcome you, all of our CAR T cell families who wanted to participate tonight. Thank you. And all of you that are tuning in to learn just a little bit more about the patient experience of CAR T cell in DIPG DMG. DIPG DMG is an aggressive, incurable cancerous glioma in the brainstem. And discussing what DIPG and DMG are and the conventional treatments and other clinical trials that are open is outside of the scope for tonight. But instead, we will focus on the patient experience in the brand new CAR T cell treatment. Suffice it to say, however, that each family that you'll hear from tonight has carefully considered all conventional treatments and any clinical trial that is open, and has opted to do what, at least as late as last fall, was considered to be a high risk, high reward decision. The CAR T cell therapy is new for brainstem tumors, and as such, the results and the patient experience are still emerging. In just a moment, we'll introduce some of the patient families taking part in the CAR T cell therapy at Standford and Seattle, who have come to know us through social media, sometimes phone calls and texts, to learn more about the patient experience. Baylor also has an open CAR T cell trial. We regret we don't know if a patient's been treated in the last few days, but prior thereto, it was open and enrolling, but not yet treating. As those watching tonight might know, our doctors cannot share our child's information with another child and vice versa. So through Facebook primarily and Instagram to some degree, these connections have been made, and it's made it easier for patients to share information and hoping to gather what we want to share with you tonight, which is the patient experience. There candidly are pros and cons to this. If the first patients don't do well on a trial, knowing their experiences might cause other patients not to want to do a trial. If the first patients do really well, it might make those that aren't able to access the trial in a heartbreaking situation. Frankly, we understand this. We've been in those situations, but we still know as parents that picking a trial feels a little like Russian roulette with DIPG. And this is our child. And if anyone should know all there is to know about a trial, we believe it's the family that's considering it. We ask every family that we knew participated in the trials to participate tonight. So unless their child was in the throes of a treatment, every single parent agreed to join the call. Stanford and Seattle and Baylor are now the sites open, but each has a different trial design and they're all independent from each other.
So in a nutshell, Stanford started collecting DIPG tissue samples as early as 2006, and it was for the purpose of learning all they could about DIPG. They were the first, to my knowledge, to grow DIPG cell lines, and they were implemented in mice so that they could try out potential treatments, and they could study how different drugs and different trials affect these tumors. If not for the courageous families who donated the tumors of their children, and for research, trials like this would simply not be possible. For this reason, I would like to take a moment and just pause and pay tribute to those families who are willing to donate tumor tissue from their precious child and give us all hope. Those of us on this call are forever indebted and eternally grateful for you. Those labs, or those in the labs and in the clinical working or clinical studies working towards a cure, we're just forever grateful. The cell lines from Stanford have been shared with over 200 institutes to date. Other institutions like Seattle and Baylor also shared data to inform clinicians on cutting-edge treatments for DIPG and DMG patients. And they do this so they can move the needle forward faster. CAR T cell therapy became available for DIPG and DMG patients in the United States in 2020. The actual CAR used in one of the studies was first developed for neuroblastomas, but it is believed to be even better suited for a tumor such as DIPG or DMG.
A great example of how important it is that we fully fund research that moves from the bench to the bedside, and then the data that's collected at the bedside to move back to the bench in order to optimize those trials and treatments. So when we talk about the importance of the basic research, the translational research, the preclinical models, which take years to move to the clinical trial, these are the steps that brought us to the Zoom call tonight. And those all happened long before any of our children were diagnosed. So we know what we're learning today will help the next children. And for our families, this really clarifies why it takes all of us in the fight against childhood cancer. Frankly, as parents, we're helpless once our child's diagnosed, and none of us thought our kids would be. So it truly, we're at the mercy of the community engaging before we ever knew what DIPG or DMG was. So thank you for anyone out there that supports this work.
So to explain very, very simply what CAR T cell therapy is, basically they take about a pint of your blood and they do what's called apheresis to it, which basically what I think means that they take out certain cells, CAR T cells to be specific, and they re-engineer them to find a protein that our tumors give off. So this blood is technically re-engineered to fight our cancer. So to put it even more simply, we're all pretty much X-Men. And that's about as much as I understand. But for the CAR T cell therapy to be successful in treating DIPG, we must follow what happened in leukemia and lymphoma for a number of years. It was in trial for a while and ended up being a cure to terrible cancers that have affected many, many families. And we just hope to follow along. If you Google around, you can find what exactly those CAR T cell therapies do, and you can see how they use them in mice to study these cell lines and how effective they were in these mice. We can only hope that with practice, these doctors get so good at using these CAR T cell therapies, they could actually end up replicating those same outcomes that they had in mice in my brain and many of the people on this call's brain. So I'm just really grateful for those mice. I'm glad I'm not a mice, but I hope to be like one.
The difference between the Stanford trial and Baylor trial and the Seattle trial is they are going after two different proteins. So sometimes you'll hear, maybe on this call or otherwise, a reference to a GD2 CAR T cell. That's what Stanford and Baylor is using, or a B7H3 is what Seattle is using. So they're just two different ones. But it's our desire, by sharing the patient experience, that CAR T cell therapy just becomes less mysterious, maybe less frightening, more obtainable. For our own family, we wanted more than anything to be able to speak with a patient who had gone through this, to understand what the patient experienced in the trial. And we had so much apprehension that, you know, if we could have heard what the experience was like in advance, I think it would have been relieved. So we've tried to do that for the next patients. And I know the families on this call have shared their experiences with others as well. And we just hope to break it down for you a little bit tonight. But what we won't do is give medical advice. And none of us are qualified to do that. And most of us learned what DIPG was when our child was diagnosed. And we won't share who should or shouldn't be eligible for CAR T trials. We won't speak for the trial teams as to the results except our own. candidly, we're not even privy to that information until it's published. But we gave both of the sites involved today, as well as Baylor, the opportunity to direct us in any way for tonight. And they were all in favor of sharing the experiences. We also let them know that any writings that they might want to share and the contacts for the trial would be posted along with this video when it's released. So you will likely hear us talk about Dr. Manje, who is at Stanford. She and Dr. Makel lead the Stanford trial, Dr. Vitanza at Seattle, and Dr. Omer at Baylor. And they all are absolutely fantastic. We also just want to clarify, this is just an undertaking for our families. So the sites never ask us to do this. A foundation never asks us to do this. It's not for any other purpose than to just share the patient stories to make it more accessible for others. And we did approach Truth 365, who's a well-known cancer advocacy organization, and just ask if they would put our recording together and make it most usable for you, the viewer. So let's get started. I wanted to first introduce Ebony from California. Ebony was 14 last summer when she participated as patient number 1 in the Stanford trial. And Ebony loves her family. She has a beautiful, beautiful smile. She had a passion for cheerleading and enjoying helping people. Ebony's DIPG tumor was progressing rapidly when she began the trial, and unfortunately time was not on her side. And she went to heaven September 24th, 2020. That was the day Jace got his CAR T cells, and I'll always be grateful for her mother, who reached out to me the night before and just told me to trust the process and in the team. And it wasn't until long after that I knew what a contribution Ebony made to CAR T cells at Stanford. So we wanted to acknowledge Ebony as a true pioneer of the CAR T cells and DIPG tonight. Emily, I think you were next to try CAR T cells. So I thought maybe you could kick off introducing yourself and as much as you want to share.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm 19, and I was diagnosed with DIPG in February 2019. I am currently being treated at Seattle, and I'm also from here. So
that makes it a little easier. How many doses of CAR T have you had?
10.
Wow. Okay. And then Jace, I think you went next.
I did. So I was diagnosed with DIPG in May of 2019, actually May 17th of 2019, which ironically became DIPG Awareness Day. So it was a weird coincidence. You know, I was given the unfortunate news that I would be lucky to have 9 months to live, and that my life would probably end one day before my 21st birthday. But since then, I've went through a few months of radiation, 10 months of a drug that is not quite passed by the FDA yet, and then through 3 clinical trials, or 3 CAR T cell trials that are at Stanford. One more, or each one got easier in some ways, or was more difficult in some ways, and I'll expand on that later.
Excellent. And Kyra, I think you were next.
Hi, Kyra, say hi. Hi, I'm Kevin. I'm Kyra's father. Kyra was diagnosed on October 1st, 2019, and she's been through 3 doses of CAR T cell therapy with Dr. Manje's team, and she's currently in the process of the 3rd one. She had the dose infused a little over 2 weeks ago. Right now, we're still doing our blood draws and various labs. And I think I do want to share that Kyra definitely did see improvements since the dose 1, where she's mostly had days prior to the clinical trial with nausea and feelings where she would want to vomit. But as soon as the infusion happened, that completely went away. So that is definitely something clinically we did see that is improved. And right now, she, the 3 doses were given to her all slightly differently, via central port or Omaya catheter. So the experience is slightly different. The first one had some CRS, and I think the team at Stanford did really, really well. We just love them, and they took care of Kyra with such great care. But yeah, love to share some more information.
And then Rebecca, I think Derek might have been next.
All right. I'm Rebecca Kalis. My son, Derek Jr., is 16 years old. He was 15 at diagnosis, October 2020. We hail from Michigan, but so we had first went to Grand Rapids, Helen DeVos, and they told us to take him home. That's what they told us. So we took him to U of M, and we saw Dr. Carl Koshman, and we became inspired. That's when I started looking on the internet. That's when I connected with Tammy Carr. And that's when she told me about Jace's mom, Lisa. This connection that we're making as parents is incredibly invaluable. And what an amazing thing. Derek has just finished round 1. He is 29 days out, and we are seeing amazing improvements in Derek. We're getting finger movements that weren't there before, toe movements, leg movements. His personality is back. He's eating like a cow. So lots of improvements. And Dr. Manji is just saying that everything is looking great. So we are very hopeful.
Maria, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Maria Kinster. I'm 23 years old from St. Paul, Minnesota. I was diagnosed with the IPG in June of 2020. Following that, I did photon radiation and chemo. And then I began a CAR T-cell treatment through Seattle Children's and Dr. Vitanza in January of 2021. I've had 9 infusions so far. And as of yesterday, actually, I've had a tumor reduction of 15%.
Great. And I might have skipped Miss Mary. How did I do that? The big 5-year-old. Now you've caught up with Kyra's age.
Right. So I'm Kristen, and this is Mary. Mary was diagnosed in October of 2020. But looking back through her medical records, they think she started having symptoms as early as January of 2019. And it just, we weren't even looking for it. We were looking for something wrong with the nerve in her eye, and ended up being rushed to Children's here in Colorado, where we are, and fell backwards into a great oncologist there who didn't even tell us that biopsies were an option. He's like, you're doing it. That's what you're doing. And so she did six weeks, 30 rounds of radiation. And while she was doing that, he amazingly had her tumor studied and sent out to all kinds of studies that were going on. And we were able to meet with all of them. And she has had 1 round of CAR T out at Palo Alto so far at Stanford, and she's doing good. We're back home now in Colorado. We have been for 2 weeks, and she has her 2-month post follow-up in 2 weeks here. So she's seen a 10% reduction in the total size of her pons, which is really amazing.
That is awesome. Katie, do you want to tell us about Levi?
Yes. And I'm so sorry. You can hear the sirens of Seattle. So we are here currently in Seattle. We are doing CAR T-cell right now. We are actually finishing up the 2nd course. We've went ahead and opted to go into a third course with Levi. In fact, his MRI is next week Thursday, to see how the 2 courses of CAR T cell therapy has been going on him. What I will say is I was at first terrified with even considering CAR T cell. I've heard horror stories, honestly. And I just want to give a quick shout out, because, this world is so small, but seeing Emily go through CAR T cell and, social media has been a blessing in that, and that Emily inspired me. So I learned about Emily before I learned about Jace. And that was a big inspiration for us to go ahead and say full send with CAR T cell. And I'd love to share more of our experience with what we've seen Levi. We went from having such a dark time after radiation to he's coming back. I see it. He's coming back. So.
Good. So when you say 2 course and going into third, does that mean he's had it twice through his Omaya?
So through his Omaya, every Thursday he gets an infusion of all these little super T cells. So he's had about 6 weeks worth of T cells going in him. So we're gonna go one more time, and then we may go ahead and make the decision to move to Seattle so he can continue treatment. We like what we're seeing.
Excellent. Okay, Rodney family, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sorry.
Hello, we're here.
No,
Julianne is with us. You want to say
hi,
hi?
Julianne.
So Julianne was diagnosed on December 12th of 2020. And we had a very rocky start. Had a very bad reaction to radiation. After her second time of radiation, she ended up intubated due to hydrocephalus. Yes, exactly.
And they cut me on the feeding tube.
Oh my goodness.
And but she worked herself back out of that, and we came out of radiation with a good reduction. But I think what Mary's mom was saying there, Kristen, about oncologists is very important. We weren't told to do a biopsy. We weren't told a lot of the things that would lead us to come to something like one of the CAR T cell programs, and really had to find our way there. It's really been a struggle to get into the right place, to get ourselves in line for a CAR T cell program. And that's where we are right now. So we can speak of somebody who's anxiously anticipating and also trying to keep things on track to get there. Right. And so we may go into that a little deeper as we go.
I want to add though, when she was diagnosed, there were many sleepless nights in the hospital. And a lot of them were spent following Emily and Jace and what was going on. And that was game changing for us to be able to sit there and see these stories unfolding. And it just gave us so much hope, even though she was in the ICU on a ventilator. We're like, wait, there's hope, there's hope. So I think it's so incredible when people will really share their stories. Also in the small world of DIPG, I was actually connected to Lisa through my niece, who has a friend who runs a pediatric cancer foundation in Oklahoma. So, it all falls together, and it's just, I can't imagine having to travel this journey without the social media and the connections we can make there.
That's weird to hear my mom say.
I know Emily's inspired us as well, and Jason and Emily would often try to get on a new drug because when they were diagnosed, there was no CAR T cell available. So it's been a lot of hopscotch for sure. Grant and Vanessa, do you guys want to introduce yourselves? And Alexandra?
Okay, this is Alexandra.
Hi, Alexandra.
She's my angel. So she's going to go and watch a movie with Michael. Off you go. Mwah. I love you.
Right.
You dizzy? Okay.
And for everybody watching, we absolutely have told all the kids, like, we want you to be kids. So anytime any of them want to go play, that is just fine. If they want to stay and share their opinions on things, that's fine too. But I think anyone watching this would know how important playtime is.
So yeah, our initial journey into this is, probably the same as everybody else's.
Shock and dismay.
Get a shocking diagnosis, and depending on the oncologist, how knowledgeable they are, and they will either tell you one thing which you don't want to hear, or maybe give you some hope. We weren't given any hope, and that was pretty devastating. But one thing that I do know, and I have a friend that was completely cured of cancer, a different cancer, but using immunotherapy, which is exactly what CAR T cells, and he was one of the first sort of phone calls that I made. He just said, look, you got to go down the immunotherapy route. That's where you have to go. And so we just started doing research. And
the night of the MRI, when we got the results, I posted on social media in my special mom law group and connected instantaneously with Jenny Moser, just from the word DIPG, and she was able to help me navigate through MD Anderson and then Texas Children's, and that's kind of where our road started. And then I was able to connect with Lisa through social media. I asked a question about a biopsy, and Lisa was so nice to respond.
Yeah, and so we started really just searching the world for any trials, because we knew it had to go down the trial route, and we searched, the world, and we would have searched Mars if it was possible. It did lead us over to Texas Children's, who they are running a CAR T program there. And we actually got to meet Dr. Omar there as well. And, just started developing a lot of confidence. And, we're not in the CAR T program yet because we're still finishing up radiation. So the way that works is you finish radiation, then you wait for everything to settle down. And then that takes about 4 weeks from the radiation. Then you get an MRI. And then from that sets sort of the baseline. And then you start into the CAR T program. So we're 4 weeks out from that MRI. We're just finishing radiation now. Things are going pretty good. Alexandra is actually doing really well. Walking, got her eyesight back. And so we're kind of hoping that we're going to be walking into the CAR T program, literally actually walking in to the CAR T program, and running out. That's what we want. So, this is a long journey, and I'm trying to think what else to add to that. Thanks, Lisa, you've just been spearing everything. So yeah, Vanessa, you want to add to that? Anything?
Yeah, we're still, possibly I live in the denial phase of grief. I have gone through, I had a lunch with people that went really badly for me. That took me down to another place. But other than that, I've been very positive. And keep her positive. So I only want her to hear the parts of this that are very positive, because she's in the same place as well. Like, she doesn't understand the ramifications. She hasn't got to that place. She got really sick for a while. Her sight was really bad, walking tough, swallowing tough, but now she's doing great. And then just last night, her sight started going down again. While she was listening to this, she was whining about, oh, tell them my sight's gone again. So yeah, there's that. I'm really interested to hear, how did you cope being in a different city from Stanford? How did you make this work for yourselves? Is this part of this conversation or not? Just anyway, those are questions for.
That's a really great question, and we can just start with that. Like, what has it meant for you guys to have to be away from home? And at least I know in the Stanford trial, you're inpatient a long time. In Seattle, you're moving to a different place outpatient for an even longer time. Jump in, guys, feel free.
Yeah, I can start. So my name is Maria again. I am in the CAR T-cell trial in Seattle. And so part of the trial details similar to Stanford, sort of, you have to be within an hour of the hospital at all times. So I'm obviously from St. Paul, Minnesota. So I had to move to Seattle for the first 2 months of the trial, which was really challenging for me to be away from home. Yeah, but it was well worth the move, I think.
And in Stanford, was it hard to find places to stay? I know these are crazy questions, but it's like,
No, I can answer that one on Stanford because so because they're inpatient for so long, there is a Ronald McDonald House, but because of COVID, you can't have siblings there. And we have a now he turned 3 while we were out there, year-old boy that we couldn't just leave at home for a month. So we actually went through the hospitals. They have a group there that help try to find housing for people. And they have a list of all kinds of hotels in the area that they can get you amazing deals at. I mean, it is a lot in pocket if you can't use the Ronald McDonald. But it worked really, really well for us. All of us were able to be out there for what amounted to 35 days. She was inpatient until the last 5 days that we were out there. But it was close enough we could go back and forth. So definitely check with hospitals, local hospital, the hospital you're going to. In this case, it was Stanford, and see what they have with their patient resource center. We had all kinds of people trying to offer us help other places, and we found the cheapest and best deal, because it was close and it worked for what we needed, was going through Stanford.
For us here in Seattle, I know it's not Stanford, but we worked with the social worker out of the hospital. They were able to get us an apartment that a nonprofit runs, because again, with Ronald McDonald House, no siblings, broke our hearts with that. But we got into an apartment complex and this nonprofit, they do take, or not just with the nonprofit, but Medicaid. Check with your insurance company. The insurance companies may also be able to pay for it. With our insurance, they're paying for our lodging while we're here in Seattle. But definitely work with the social worker. They're the most compassionate people. Because when you hear social worker, you think of custody cases and child abuse. With these hospital social workers, they really are angels.
Yeah, I'll piggyback off of that. I fly to Seattle every 2 weeks now to get infusions, and we've worked with the Seattle social worker to get discounts on the hotel rates.
So that's one thing I would just say, in the beginning, we felt like, gosh, other people probably need help more, but, the idea is you want to have a really, really long journey. And so absolutely reach out. There are reimbursement of flights. We fly with an organization that provides us Southwest vouchers. We get on the plane first. No trouble booking a flight, so that's wonderful. And then there are other foundations that will reimburse any out-of-pocket costs that you do have up to certain amounts. So, you guys can reach out to me, probably anyone on this call, for ideas on that too. Very good. Well, let's move on just a little bit. I know for Jace, his biggest question in doing the trial was what was the TV like in the room and whether they had Wi-Fi at Stanford. So can you guys tell us just a little bit about the best parts of Stanford or Seattle, what the hospital experience is like, and maybe if there's some you don't like, you can throw that in too.
I'll chime in if you don't mind.
Okay.
So the rooms are actually pretty nice on the 500 floor at Stanford. That is the oncology floor. And there's 2 TVs. The child gets a huge one and the parents get a small one. There's a bathroom, a shower in each room. There's also a pull-out couch and a curtain. So, you know, we were there for a good while, and it was pretty comfortable after a while. You kind of treat it like a hotel. And if you kind of have that mindset and you're getting out there every day and you're, you know, doing what you got to do and getting outside, which is imperative, it's not so bad.
Mary, what did you get to ride around on the floor at the hospital?
So Mary got to have a little truck that she could ride around the floor when we were up on the 5th floor. So once we were out of ICU, and she was tearing it up. She would literally run into the doctors while they were doing rounds in the morning and thought it was really funny. And if nurses weren't paying attention, she would ram into them too at their desks. Yeah, as far as staying in the hospital, there's cafeteria, fortunately, we are in COVID times, so things like Grubhub and DoorDash were really easy to work out at the hospital. Unfortunately, since we're in COVID times, there were restrictions on where the kids could go, which there normally is on the oncology floor anyways, but they were much more restrictive. So the hardest part for her, I think, was not being able to go outside. That was probably your hardest part, huh?
So just to back up here. So when they're in there for that month period, right? Does a parent stay with them the entire time or not?
Yes, a parent can. Actually, you do, at least right now with COVID. You have 2 parents on their list that are okay to be in there. Those are the only people allowed in right now. But you can stay whenever you want. You can change out with a parent as long as they're on that list whenever you want. We did 24-hour shifts per kid, and they weren't always at the same time, but you know, my husband was able to run in at midnight at one point to be with us. So it was pretty open.
They just have to be the same 2 the whole time. You can't send one parent home and have somebody else come or anything like that.
Yeah.
How does it work in Seattle, guys?
Yeah, I was going to say in Seattle, our social worker was able to get it so that Emily's sister was one of her caregivers because she preferred to have her sister there, her parents, 99.9% of the time. And thankfully for us, we actually live about, 17 miles from the hospital. So it wasn't a huge undertaking. Sleepless nights for me, knowing that I wasn't there, but for the most part, that she was with her sister. And the nurses, I mean, the entire staff is just, we have no complaints anywhere. But I always felt like she was really well taken care of as far as the nurses, but much better, much happier Emily if it was just her and her sister like they were on vacation.
I would like to go off of that. I'd like to say that Emily, the OG, I the same exact way decided to have my sister there. We live in Kansas and we flew to Standford, so obviously my mother was in town, and she ended up spending just about every night there during one of my stays. But definitely understand the importance of having a sibling there, as well as your mother. But definitely say anytime that anything got really serious, I always wanted my mother there, and thank God she's willing to be there.
The mom goddess, huh? Okay, were you at the Lucille Packard Hospital? Is that the one?
Right.
Okay.
So I would assume, well, I'm just going to speak for Stanford, and you guys came in on Seattle, but this is a teaching hospital, and so there's an entire team taking care of our kids. There are neuro-oncologists, neurosurgeons, neurologists, CAR T-cell specialists, oncologists, and then they have fellows, and there's residents below the fellows. So you can imagine there are checks every hour around the clock as far as, how is your seeing? How are your vitals? Can you count backwards from 100. I think they even asked Mary that one time. By 10. I can't imagine a 5-year-old being able to do that, but that's how residents learn that 5-year-olds can't count backwards from 100. So they're really awesome teams that work together. There's pain management, PT, etc. Like any teaching hospital, when you have tons of cooks in the kitchen, there can be some cross communication. But I will say, our experience has been that the top folks of this trial, Dr. Manji, Dr. Makel, Dr. Robbie, Dr. Manger, we call him, are extremely accessible. And we just have a rule that Jace doesn't get any medicine unless we ask Dr. Monte, and nothing changes. And so to be able to just text the person or call the person is huge. And I just want to emphasize that, because in other hospitals that I've been at with other family members, I often felt like it was pulling teeth to be able to talk to a doctor, and I never have felt that way in the 3 rounds with Jace. I've never felt like we were unheard or unseen, but just the opposite, that I was a little embarrassed that Jace was sending people out of the room because they had just checked him 10 minutes earlier. So that's been our experience. And at Stanford, I really believe the nurses love working there. And it is rare that we have ever had a nurse that Jace didn't care for. And typically that was just a personality issue. And usually because they were super sweet and he needs a little salty like his mom. How about Seattle? It's something to add there.
So I'll speak to our experience. So we started our trial on March 16th. So I want to say pretty brand new, and he's in Brainchild 3. So with us, he doesn't need to be inpatient at all. He does need to be within 1 hour of the hospital. So we're actually 5 minutes away from the hospital. He goes in 3 days a week. Mondays are labs, and they will tap his Omaya, which is on his head, and collect that cerebral spinal fluid for testing and research. And then we'll speak to our oncologist. And even though Dr. Vitanza runs the program, he's not the only one we see. And so far, everyone we have seen on his team have been just phenomenal and beautiful people. Just absolutely amazing. We haven't met someone that we were uncomfortable with so far. So Mondays are that. And then Wednesdays, we do our pre-infusion check. So again, he goes in, we get labs done, we speak with the oncologist. And then on Thursdays, he goes in for an infusion. Now, Thursdays are our long days. We get there 7:45 in the morning. His T cells have been frozen. So we wait for them to unfreeze, and then we check viability. And if they're good, and they've always been good so far, they will go ahead and do the infusion through his Omaya tap, which lasts no more than 5 minutes, I think. So that part the infusion process isn't very long at all. And then we wait another 3 hours at the hospital where they just monitor him. Now they do load him up on some Benadryl and Tylenol. So he's absolutely knocked out at that point, and very sleepy, very groggy, but they continue to just monitor his vitals, see how he's doing. And at that 3 hour mark, we see the doctor that administered the infusion. She gives us the okay, and then we just head back and we wait to do it all over again on Monday. So it's been kind of in and out, except for Thursdays, which has been pretty good. We're not holed up anywhere, and so that's just our Seattle experience.
I'm seeing kind of maybe is there a difference between Seattle and Stanford, is that Seattle are doing lots of small infusions, whereas Stanford are doing a few large infusions. Is that?
Yeah, I believe I can speak on that a little bit because I was between the two programs. The Seattle is a smaller dose more frequently. So every 2 weeks I go in to get the infusion.
And then they also are targeting 2 different proteins. And so it's good to look at the trials and just visit with the doctors. Both proteins are found in DIPG. And so then it just becomes kind of each camp as to what protein they think is best to go after. But let's speak a little bit to what I think most families really want to know, and that is like, what side effects have you experienced? How are those treated? And then if you haven't said like what the result has been so far and you're comfortable saying it, would you guys go ahead and speak to that too? Jace, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start.
Okay.
Yeah, I can start. So I have the standard CAR T cell treatment 3 times. First time was it was very easygoing, considerably. It was injected into my spine, and so through a catheter, it was 2 times. I would explain it like it's a long waiting game. So there's about a week of waiting, and then all at once the cells hit you. You get a large fever. You get for me there was some like shaking. I was really cold. Body was stuff that some kind of disease or sickness. That lasted about probably 48 hours, and then from there on it was recovery, and I ended up recovering quickly. I believe since the trial was so new, I was scheduled to be there for 28 days, and I ended up staying 17. And the only reason I stayed that long is because they had to change the protocols to get us out earlier. My second CAR T cell dose was in January, I believe, and that was the first time they injected through my catheter that is actually underneath my hair. And so it was a very similar experience with a lot less wait time. So instead of waiting for about a week, I waited for about 24 hours. And then I had the same, like very storm-like, where everything hit at once. I had a large fever. I believe there was some aches and pains. And but the good thing about this is, even though I was in a lot of pain and it was a difficult period for me, after I kind of came back to, I didn't remember any of it. I had no clue that any of it happened. And the last thing I remembered was a few days before I was injected with the cells. And so it ended up being very beneficial. So the result from my first one was very subtle. We could see slight shrinkage in my tumor altogether, mostly around its borders. And I would say they never put a number on it, but to me it looked somewhere around 10 to 15%. So it was encouraging because that was the first time my tumor had ever shrank. But it was not quite the result I wanted to see. The second time, however, was so much more encouraging. When we finally got the MRI after the inflammation left, so I have 2 parts to my tumor, which basically there's a top part and a bottom part. I can't explain it any better than that. But to the bottom part, that shrunk over 50%. And then the top part shrunk 25% with a bunch of shrinkage of my overall pons. My ventricles became much more clear. And overall, I went from not barely being able to walk, barely being able to swallow, to having almost full mobility again. I couldn't quite jog or run, but I was able to use both hands. I was able to tie my shoes to everything that you normally would. And so it was life-changing for me, as at that point in my life. I was very worried. I was overcome with anxiety about the future, but that was just so encouraging. So recently, in the month of April, I believe, I went back for dose number 3. Again, it was pushed into my catheter. However, I had very different experience, and we didn't know why until weeks later. But again, it was unexpected but encouraging. So what ended up happening is I experienced immediately a headache, kind of some aches and pains through my body. I had kind of a weird fever, but it was very low. It was nothing like I'd experienced before. And that lasted for about a week. And so I thought, I mean, at that point, I just figured it didn't work. Maybe it had messed up. And at that point, I found myself kind of questioning why I even do this trial if it's not going to work. It's terrible. I have to be with my friends, yada, yada, yada. And then all of a sudden, again, I was hit with what I like to call the storm of symptoms, to where I had a very heavy fever. I was rushed to the ICU again. And I went through all of these symptoms that I had experienced before. Unfortunately for me, it caused this new headache, and we couldn't quite figure out what it was. Basically, it was a headache that any type of regular pain medication would not touch. So the team began with what you would do with any type of pain by putting me on a ton of pain medication. For me, it was fentanyl, and they put me on a high dosage, and that had ramifications. But luckily, I figured out a couple of days later that the pain wasn't necessarily fixable with pain medication. It was actually more resembled a migraine based off of some nerve that I have in my brain that was being infected by inflammation. Affected, not infected, my bad. But so they put me on what they called a migraine cocktail. Basically gave me a bunch of different types of migraine medication, and it relieved my headache within 15 minutes. And so from there, I built back mobility. I was in the hospital for that time, I believe, about 26 days, which had a toll on me just because I was in bed a lot. I ended up losing a bunch of weight, but as soon as I got out of the hospital, I immediately started feeling like myself again. Was able to go back to physical therapy and really start working back towards this new normal. So what ended up happening, and again, we didn't find this out until after we left Stanford, was that instead of the cells going into my brain and immediately attacking the tumor, they went down into my body and decided to recreate themselves. And that's what happened for the first week. This was what caused the doctors to be extremely confused. They were expecting an immediate reaction, but nothing major happened for a week. After the cells went down and recreated themselves, they went back up and attacked the tumor. That's what caused this familiar reaction that I've been used to because of the first two trials. But the good news is that because they decided to go down and recreate themselves, these T cells continue to work in my blood. They are constantly found in any blood draws, any CSF pulls, any of that fluid, and so they're kind of found throughout my whole entire body. This is what you want in T cell therapy. I didn't necessarily expect it, but even now I feel light symptoms at different periods of the day, just like a random headache, or I start sweating randomly even though it's cold outside. Just random things happen, and it is to believe that that is the T cells continuing to work in my blood. So each time has been a different experience for me. It's been a different experience for the doctors, but each time I've become more and more encouraged based off of what the doctors have found and what the doctors have been able to do. So my overall experience is I praise it. I praise T cell therapy. I think it'll be the therapy of the future, and I'm excited to do my part and hopefully be the first to see the fruits of their labor. And so it's really cool to be in my position.
I would say too that from the second dose to the third dose, there was no regrowth. And the last MRI still showed no regrowth for days. So that was kind of an added blessing that 50% reduction stayed. And then he had further reduction from that this time, both in the bulkiest part and then in the hole. You will see that Jace has a side of his mouth that droops. He has a cyst that lies along that particular nerve. And while at Stanford, they did the first Omaya catheter to the cyst in his pons. And so about every 2 weeks now, he goes to have his pons drained. There's no pressure in that cyst they've found, but it does fill up with a byproduct of the tumor. And after providing an Omaya to Jace's cyst, I think, did Derek get one added to his as well? So
yes,
they just
and, yes, and a VP shunt. Actually, he actually has 2 Omayas and a VP shunt for draining purposes, and they've been very helpful to us.
So even if somebody's not looking for CAR T out there, but you know that they have a cyst that's causing them problems, Jace would get lockjaw, have the droop. That's an option now that's being performed, at least in a few places. So who else wants to talk about different?
Kyra, too. I saw, thank you, Jace, for sharing your experience. I saw some similarities and actually some differences also, because Kyra has currently going through her 3rd dose, right? And we found that her first dose with the chemotherapy was actually very tough. She was vomiting every 30 minutes. The whiteboard was filled up where we were, writing down her records. And the CRS was pretty bad. But for her second and this one, the 3rd dose that went through Omaya, actually her reaction was quite mild. And even the medical team also found that her reaction is fairly mild. And for the 3rd one, she's still currently going through it right now. Can't speak too much of it. Still constantly monitoring. But so some similarities and some differences. So I guess it kind of speaks to that. Everybody is a little bit different, but so kind of keep that in mind, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how has Kyra's shrunk?
So I think for dose 1, we saw a lot of clinical improvements, similar to what others have said, finger movements that weren't there before. We saw, I know what Dr. Monge likes to call it the Mickey Mouse inside the brain. There's an area that kind of controls limb movement. So we saw a lot of shrinkage there. We never heard any quantified numbers, but we saw visually, before, after, there were shrinkage. I think for the 2nd and the 3rd one, I can't speak to right now because it's still going. There could even be inflammation in her brain right now for the 3rd. For the 2nd one, we saw some different clinical improvements, maybe, voice, the loudness of her voice, even, little minute things that you may want to record videos here and there sometimes, so you can remind yourself, what was she capable of doing and what can she do now? The MRI saw some other areas improve, but again, we never were given like quantifiable numbers, but at least visually that we could see. And I think right now for her most current one, there are some maybe inflammations, so it's hard to say whether there's improvement yet or not. So
yeah. Just a question, from when she was diagnosed to when she got the CAR T cells, how long was that period?
Oh, it's more than a year, a little more than a year.
Oh, okay. So her symptoms were really bad before she even got the CAR T cells.
Kyra had a quite unique experience with radiation. Her radiation was really bad, actually. So she went from being able to run, twirl, to crawling on the ground. And it took many, many months of that kind of puzzled the radiology teams. How come it didn't go with the normal cell cycle that they expect of recovery? So her recovery after radiation is kind of unique among all the kids that we know of. So that, again, every kid is quite different. So perhaps the CAR T therapy could also kind of vary that sense too.
And Rebecca, Katie, everybody, from the time you were diagnosed until you were in the CAR T cell, how long was that period?
So I'll share from our experience. We were told we were given 6.5 weeks to do radiation and that we had time to settle on what clinical trial, depending on what the biopsy revealed and what he's eligible for. At first, we wanted to pursue ONC201. And then we got news that Levi did not get picked up for ONC201, and it crushed our heart. It crushed our heart so much. And so we said, you know what, on to the next thing. Let's do CAR T cell. So he finished radiation in September, and he also had a rough recovery with radiation. So the problem that we found ourselves in is that no clinical trial will pick you up if you're not stable. That word stable became our miracle to ask for. Like, God, please just let my kid be stable so that we can get to this next phase. He ended up getting an emergency shunt put in to take away the drainage because he had hydrocephalus. The radiation caused the tumor to get so angry that there was so much swelling going on. He couldn't walk. He couldn't eat. He was vomiting everything up. And it was the scariest time of our lives. So after the shunt and also being on steroids, that also created a big issue because he could not go to a clinical trial being on steroids. So I'm trying to wrap it up briefly. September radiation ended with his diagnosis in July. Late September emergency shunt. Through October, we had to wait for the healing from that surgery so that he could pursue Avastin. And then he was getting weekly infusions of Avastin. Important part with the Avastin was to get him off the steroids. Again, that became our key: get him off the steroids, get him stable. In December, I had a telehealth consult with Dr. Vatanza that our oncologist in Colorado helped us get. Spoke with Dr. Vatanza, and I don't care about specifics with CAR T cell. All I cared about, is this going to help? Is this going to make my baby feel better? So when he asked me if I had any questions, I said, yes, when can we get him? So late December, early January, we got word that Levi would get picked up. Now, with clinical trials, it can be really frightening in this waiting game of when we can go. There's other kids involved as well. So we just had to wait for our time. Mid-March, so Levi went up to January and February to get an apheresis so they can collect the blood. So mid-March is when we got the phone call. Your cells are ready. His cells were ready on by the 8th of March, which was my husband's birthday. So he was like, happy birthday to me. The cells are ready. So by March 16th, we were able to come up and start our treatment.
Very good. I know I was talking with a parent recently, and we didn't have, and Emily didn't have CAR T cell available, Kyra either, when we were first diagnosed. So there wasn't a choice for us of, do you do something easier like ONC201, or do you go straight to CAR T? And I don't know what I would have picked, but I do think there are not as many stories with DIPG with shrinkage in ONC201 anecdotally as we see shrinkage here, but this is so early. And as you're hearing, every single one of the patients have a different experience. And, we always say we're like test dummy number one, Jace is, and we're not necessarily wrong, but I do think both teams at Seattle and Stanford, and I have no reason to believe Baylor would be different, are doing everything they can to learn from one patient to the next to the next. Not using steroids was super important to us, and anakinra was introduced, for instance, with Jace. And, I think that helped them use it a little earlier for Kyra. and maybe reduced some of the CRS, and for Derek and Mary too. So we're all just, in that process of learning, but blessed that there is the opportunity if this is what a family is looking for. Anybody else have a different a side effect story that they can share before we go on?
So, oh, go ahead, Emily.
So first of all, I want to say that when I was offered the CAR T trial, I had the choice between that or ONC201, and that was a kind of difficult decision, but I decided with CAR T. And so I was treated from September to February. I am not on it anymore, but the symptoms were pretty minimal. Headaches if I moved a lot, like any more than from the bathroom to the bed. So I stayed in the hospital for a couple of days after. And then the thought of food was revolting. So I ate a lot of pudding and smoothies and stuff.
So to answer your question, Vanessa, it was Emily started the CAR T cell therapy 19 months after diagnosis. When she started it, she was stable and walking and doing most things normally. She did the regular 30 days, 6 weeks of radiation, and then for an entire year, every other week she would get Avastin, temozolomide, and irinotecan. And
okay, so these are the drugs you're all talking about that I guess
drugs.
do they work or they not work?
It worked the radiation and that combination of drugs worked really well for her. She took it for an entire year. And we saw over 50% shrinkage in the size of her tumor. And then she went the whole summer with just pretty much, I think it was Avastin every other week, just Avastin. And then she kind of had to back off the Avastin to get her Ommaya surgery because of the bleeding risks. So she would have Avastin here and there, just a few times here and there. And then she started the CAR T cell trial September. Yeah, and she did okay. And then she was stable. Her tumor is still stable. It's the same. There hasn't been any.
And it's much smaller than before. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it was not from the CAR T trial.
It was smaller from radiation, but then I had to stop pretty much all treatment to get the Ommaya and the apheresis and that stuff. So pretty much grew back to size.
Okay.
No, it's the same size. It's the same, yeah. So so she left the trial in March. Was it March? February, end of February, because even though the tumor hadn't gotten bigger, it hadn't gotten smaller, and she started seeing more symptoms, like not being able to talk and the usual DIPG things. So because she was the first one, we were very tied to the rules. Like with Levi, it sounds like he's getting it every week. She was only, and I think Maria too, every other week at a certain dose. And because of the rules, the third patient had to have been on treatment for 3 months.
Three patients.
Three
patients for 3 months without reactions to the dosage.
Yeah, so we were not able to get any changes further from there because of those rules set forward. But Levi's experience is very different than Emily's, probably with dosing too. We could maybe swing back around it. Right now, she did another round of radiation, and then she's on panabinostat right now and Avastin every other week, and we've seen another 15% decrease in the tumor.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah,
That is wonderful.
Oh, Emily.
5%. I'm sorry.
Keep
Just
going,
corrected her.
Emily. You made it to the 5% club past 2
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
Keep going, girl.
Yeah, because I don't see change unless it's 5% or more.
Well, Emily, you definitely inspired us.
Same here.
Yes,
Definitely.
absolutely.
My experience was a lot like Emily's. First off, I was diagnosed only a few months after her, but found her story during radiation. So I've kind of gotten the privilege of following in her footsteps in a way, of kind of just seeing everything from a few months behind of where I'm going to be. But like Emily, I didn't have the opportunity to do CAR T cell right after my first round of radiation and chemotherapy. I did radiation for 30 days and chemotherapy. I had 30 rounds of radiation. I think it was a total of 6 weeks, but I had chemotherapy the whole time. And that's kind of where I started to see symptoms. I think I just remember a 4th of July experience where I overheated, I started throwing up. It was a terrible experience. It was kind of the first time that I really knew like how devastating this diagnosis could be. But then I got on ONC201. This is about 3 months after diagnosis. I started ONC201, and it was very successful in keeping my tumor the exact same for about 11 months. So this brought me around to a month 13 or 14, and that's where I had the decision of either starting this new trial of CAR T cell therapy or continuing the trial of ONC201, which may or may not be still working in my brain. And that's how I came to the CAR T cell treatment. Yeah, but I would just like to say that Emily is the OG, as I like to say, the original gangster. So I following her footsteps has been a privilege.
Let's go into a little bit of a speed round. How does that sound? What is, for those of you that have been treated by Dr. Mange or Dr. Vintanza, what is the best thing about either of those doctors?
All right, I'm going to have to interject because you know how I feel about Dr. Mange. This woman, when she comes into the room, is a presence. You can tell that her heart is right there. She looks Derek in the eyes and she tells him how proud she is of how hard he's fighting. You can see the tears welling up. This woman is in it. She has the most beautiful bedside manner of any doctor that I've ever encountered. And I've encountered some good doctors because we have the University of Michigan. So if for anyone who hasn't met her, when you do, you'll know exactly what I mean. Truly.
I second that. I have never experienced a doctor give you her cell phone number. And when she said contact her with anything, she absolutely means it. She would be texting back and forth at midnight. And you're like, okay, I'm going to see you at 8 a.m. Why are you still up? But she is there 100%. Even now that we're in Colorado, she is still working with us and in constant contact. And she really cares about the patient as a whole. And not only the patient, but the family. Like, we're in Colorado, and it is very tough to work and have younger kids and try to get to California, back to Colorado, all that kind of stuff. And you have to do regular follow-ups. We might be the exception, and I think we are, but she's able to do some follow-ups here at home with her oncologist so that we can just kind of focus on her and not have to focus on running out to California every month, which is huge. So
excellent.
And, on the Dr. Mange, we echo the same sentiment. She treats Kyra like she's her mother. We've also seen her eyes tear up, often, as we do in the conversations. And watching her give Kyra these long bear hugs, brings tears to our eyes. So yeah.
I'll put a bug in Levi's ear, because Levi, even though he's not here in front of the camera, he's actually really shy, even though he's a nut when you get him one-on-one, but when he's in the doctor's office, sometimes we have to remind him to be a little serious so that they can gauge proper reactions. But
I won't be serious either. No. I refuse. It's
yeah.
I apologize. That is my children.
Oh, it's all good.
I'm sorry, you guys. I'm not exactly sure how to. They just stop. We're 2,000 miles apart right now, and we're a homeschooling family, so we're very tight knit.
Oh gosh.
So
I apologize.
it's all good. With us, that we had one experience that I want to share where with the Omaya catheter, Dr. Vitanza kind of gave him a poke, and it hurt to the point where Levi had tears, and that doesn't happen all the time. He's 12. He's a really tough, resilient kid with everything going on. The minute Levi said it hurt, Dr. Vitanza pulled it out and he said, you know what, we don't need to collect this week. And it's just his compassion has just, it's just amazing. It just is. He's not the only one we see. He's got a team. I know he's the brains behind the operation, but the Miss Corey, who typically does the infusions, she's also phenomenal, and she's a beautiful person. Susan that he sees, amazing. And yeah, we like seeing Dr. Vitanza because he seems like a nerdy guy, and Levi's, that's totally Levi's style, and it's very complimentary to our oncologist in Colorado, Dr. Dahl, who's also a really nerdy guy, and we adore him too. So
well, knowing both of them, you can't go wrong, I don't think. Go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I really appreciate how well Dr. Vitanza listens to me, because sometimes I feel like he listens to me better than I listen to me, and I just love that.
That's
I would like to follow that up by saying I've met Dr. Vitanza on a couple of Zoom calls. He's never actually seen me personally, but I have the utmost respect for that man. He was able to talk to me like I was a normal guy. He was also able to be very serious with me and tell me things that I needed to know, which ended up being super important. And then I met Dr. Manji, who has become incredibly close with me, just somebody who I am able to trust and know that she has my best interest in her thoughts and in her actions. And even when the trial's not exactly going how she expected it to, she's able to be calm, cool, and collected, and just works really quickly at figuring out what exactly is wrong and what she can do. I'm known to be typically a calm guy, but during my CAR T-cell trials with some of the pain medication, I've gotten to the point where I've yelled at Dr. Manji. I regret this, but she just looked at me very calmly, was able to calm me down, but was also able to understand what I was saying, not how I was saying it, and make decisions accordingly. She changed medications. She she changed some of the action steps, and when they would check on me to exactly how I wanted them. So not only was she able to decide what was important for me and my health, but she was also able to be accommodating when I was less than accommodating.
I do want to say some of my favorite times are when Jace is kind of out of it and he comes up and he says, Dr. Manji, a little kid couldn't go through it like this. You've got to find another way. And then lays back down. He is just always about a little kid could not do this. All right, last question. We have taken up so much of your time, but I appreciate all your input and I hope others will too. What is one thing that you wish you would have known that you didn't know? Or what was the best thing you did to prepare, or how would you prepare if you were going through this again?
I can start. Yeah. You can. I would just say to have patience would be my biggest advice. it takes a while, definitely until your second or third MRI to see any sort of results or impact. At least it was for me. So just to be patient, and even if you don't see results at first, to not lose hope that the treatment's working or benefiting you.
Patience, again, definitely. There were times that I lost my patience and Mary lost her patience. But also, you know your kid. They know the doctor part. They know, they know way more about the brain than we ever want to. But we know our kid, and we know their spirit, and we know, what works to get to them to get a response. Like Mary wanted nothing to do with neurology checks. She was very, very mean to the neurologists to the point they were scared to see her. She was 4. But through talking with us and stuff like that, we started to realize her just coloring was the best way to get a neuro check, and nobody had to literally come in the room and talk to her. And so just to remember that you know your kid best and you have to be an advocate for them. And I have to remind myself this all the time, that I'm allowed to speak up for them. And you've got to, because they're relying on us to give them feedback. This is a study. They don't have all the answers yet. It's a partnership. And that's really, next time going in, I'm going to remember that. And you don't need to also bring a zillion things to the hospital like I did, because you're going to have to drive home with all of these because you can't get them on an airplane. So that's mine.
I'd tend to say one of the things that we got lucky with was at Texas Children's, where we started out. They just said, right, let's get a shunt in her right now, and we'll do a biopsy straight away. And that was probably the best thing that we did, just because it took away the headaches immediately. I mean, Alexandra had massive headaches before. And that was why we got the first MRI. I was like, why is she getting all these headaches? But the shunt was perfect. It was just the way to do it, and the biopsy. So we knew exactly what we're getting into straight away, and then we could start searching around with that. So at another hospital we're at the first time, at Dell in Austin, they said, well, you can get a biopsy or not. It's pretty dangerous. So maybe just get a biopsy. It's not that dangerous these days. They used a robot to get it. No effects, and it gives you peace of mind knowing exactly what you're dealing with. So I think we just got good advice at Texas Children's at Baylor with Dr. Amar and the doctors there.
I think we really like to second that, because we did end up in a place that said, no, it's too dangerous to get a biopsy. Don't do it now. And we listened, and we did not have a biopsy done until after radiation. And Jules fortunately reacted very well to radiation, but it made the biopsy more difficult because they really did not get enough usable tissue. We have the information we need to proceed with treatments, but we don't have the information we would want to share and to have available to other researchers. So yeah, I think it's so important, no matter what your oncologist says to you, to say, yeah, we need a biopsy first.
Yeah,
Well, these CAR T-cell programs, you need a biopsy anyway. So any of these good trials, you need one. So just get a biopsy.
The situation we're in right now, Dr. Vitanza calls a game of Tetris. We're waiting to be, first of all, just given the, hey, let's go, let's do this, from Seattle at the moment. And a lot of it is we're on Avastin right now, so we will have to take 28 days off of that to get an Omiya port. The apheresis comes after that, et cetera, and getting all those pieces into place is very difficult, especially since our last MRI was not very favorable. And we are in a situation where we don't know whether we're in post-radiation effects with some of the, we've been told by a few different people that it's pseudo-progression, and we've been told by one person that it's progression, and so there are many different out there, and getting all those ducks in a row for the trial is actually very, very challenging. And it's a very nervous place for us right now, because we have to, somebody alluded to the need to stay stable. And that's where we are right now, is trying to stay stable and to get everything in the right place at the right time to get there. And it's very challenging. But not only that, I think there are real challenges that need to be faced with the expense of the treatment and the infrastructure around it in terms of producing T cells. We're waiting for, in line with people who have leukemia, other, and other trials that are having to do their T cell production. And so that waiting list is getting larger and larger and more difficult for them to keep up with, I think, too. So the challenges of getting to the trial are really, really significant.
My question is, so you've got to get them off all meds? Is that the answer?
Keppra was allowed to continue with Jace. Some doctors believe that Keppra can slow the progression of DIPG. It's an anti-epileptic drug, and although Jace doesn't have seizures, he was allowed to continue on it.
That was actually a requirement for Brainchild to actually be on a anti-seizure medicine. Yeah.
Mary's required to be on it, and she wasn't on it before she started CAR T.
Yeah. Same here.
So, but otherwise,
but no steroids. Okay.
For the apheresis and the Omaya and stuff, it's just too dangerous to be doing chemo because it affects your blood, and so it'll affect the blood they take and put you at higher risk
for bleeding. So Emily doesn't take steroids. She took steroids very little throughout this entire process. Avastin has always been her go-to drug, and the Avastin can cause bleeding issues. So you don't want to be doing brain surgery with bleeding issues. So you have to have a washout period. And for her, it was 21 days of absolutely nothing. And we all know that's really scary with DIPG because 21 days is a long time. But yeah, she got through it and went back on. As soon as she was allowed to get the Avastin again, she did.
Yeah, really from the washout for apheresis all the way to the first dose of CAR T cells, it's about 6 weeks, I think. So that would be one argument for a family that's considering, do I do something else for a while and then switch to this? If you could do that during that honeymoon period after radiation, where, the tumor doesn't seem to be as unstable, that 6 weeks might not feel like as long a time. With Jace, this opportunity came up a couple weeks after he had just 2 or 3 symptoms start, which hadn't been there for about a year. And that was probably our scariest time, was could we get to the dose of CAR T cells before things started, to really go downhill. And we did. With the second dose, he had quite a bit of symptom change after the first dose in a negative way. And again, we were like, can we get to that dose before? Now, between dose 2 and 3, that wasn't really the case. But a friend long ago said to me, the scariest time is when you don't have a plan. And that has always stuck with me from, new diagnosis on, like, what's the plan and what's the backup plan? Because it just feels better when you know what your options are.
Yeah, backup plan is, we always have a backup plan. In fact, we have another plan. This was our backup plan. We have another plan just in case. But one thing that our tumor team actually suggested, like, they didn't even ask us, it was just a given that we were going to do it, was to get a port. And I know not everyone has one, but if you have the opportunity to get one, do it, because the amount of times you're going to be getting blood draws and picked and prodded, and anytime you have to go inpatient, it's one less stick in the arm. They just access her port, and she's good to go the entire time. So that's definitely something that you would want to add to your list. And if you're going to go in and get, another surgery or something, have them add it to the list. It's insanely important.
One thing we learned that I think it's important to pass on is you know, I know it'll get better, but right now there's so much involved with the CAR T-cell trials that things like physical therapy prescription day one of hospitalization sometimes gets missed. So, you know, in this round, Jace was maybe 16 days in before any physical therapy started. I think, you know, if music therapy, art therapy is something that your child would benefit from, let them know right away. If, you know, talking with one of the hospital psychologists or palliative care members, you know, about concerns and anxiety and thoughts, you know, involve them right away. Because I think there's so much focus on the trial. Sometimes the other pieces get missed. And I know for Jace, he said, you know, I could kind of give a crap if my tumor's, you know, 2 centimeters smaller, if I can't walk into, you know, a fun place with my friends when I get out. So it all sort of just goes hand in hand. Well, I
Yeah,
just want to
definitely the PT. I just want to go off your PT real quick. Ask for PT day one if your kid's in the hospital, because
Yes.
Mary did not get PT when she was in the hospital. They kept saying they were coming in and they never did. And she's having to do it here and learn how to rewalk, because there was just a lot of atrophy. You had a very, very rambunctious 4-year-old that laid in a bed for 3.5 weeks. And, you know, the last night of chemo, she was doing a dance party, and she went from that to she's now crawling around the floor here because it hurts to walk. So definitely PT, ask for it the very first day, no matter what they're in for. So.
Yeah.
For Kyra, the child life specialist team, and we try to coordinate them with, say, events that Kyra is scared of, like Omaya Tap. We heard that earlier. Kyra's extremely scared of that. And but having the, you know, art therapist or you know, child life services folks in the room kind of distracting her is literally the only way for her to have it done. So it is possible to kind of ask for those kind of aligned kind of scheduling.
That is perfect. And I know in Seattle, Kensley, who's participating there, was showing me the doll that she gets to practice accessing the Omaya and giving the CAR T cells in a doll. So that's really cool too. I just wanted to thank all of you guys for being willing to come on and share a little bit about your experiences, because they're all so different. You know, the families that came before us primarily have paved the way, along with, you know, the researchers and clinicians that have so tirelessly worked for a day like this, when they can really say something about reduction of tumor and opportunities for longer quality of life. And I know that we're paving the way. You all are paving the way for those that come after as well. I think that these transparent communications are really important. If anyone viewing decides that this is something that's helpful, you know, go ahead and comment, because in my opinion, this is the way that we transform DIPG. We start having more conversations between funders and parents and clinicians and researchers. I'll never forget 3 months after Jason
And patients.
And patients, yes. I'll never forget 3 months after Jace was diagnosed, he spoke at the NIH on a panel when we didn't really even understand DIPG, and kind of felt like, why would they ask him to speak, you know, so soon into the diagnosis? And a researcher came up, and of course, there are about 200 people that stood in line to talk to him, which was really humbling. But I remember the researcher said, I've worked on DIPG cells in the lab for 15 years. I've never met a DIPG patient. And, you know, you forget that, you know, your part of the story, but we don't know all the other voices. We had an engineer of the CAR T reach out to us and say, we've been working on this CAR for X amount of time, and it's really cool to see somebody benefit from the work. So Thank you for sharing your stories and being so transparent. And as this progresses, we'll see what else we need to share.